Welcome back to the Lekutis Sichos project, and today we will be learning the first Sicha on Pashas Kistovoy in volume 19, Chelek Yutes. It is a Sicha on a Rashi. In order to understand the Rashi better, we'll go back and review the sequence of the parsha up to and a little bit beyond the posuk which we're going to learn. The parsha begins with the mitzvah of bikurim, of bringing the first fruits of the land annually to the Beis Hamikdash, where they were given to the Kohen, and the owner made a declaration of thanks to Hashem for bringing us to this land. He goes through the history of how we ended up in Egypt and how they enslaved us, how Hashem redeemed us from there with great miracles, and then ends with the fact that Hashem brought us to this beautiful land of Eretz Yisrael. And now the farmer would say, I have brought the first fruit of this land, whereupon he would hand it over to the Kohen. That is section number 1 in the first 7 or more 10 psukim of the parsha. Then section number 2. The parsha continues with the mitzvah of vidui maisrois, the confession or declaration concerning tithing. In order to explain that, I'll have to backtrack and go into some of the laws of Meiser. The mitzvah is like this. Years are divided into segments of 7. Shmitas. The first year of a 7-year cycle, the farmer would take off terumah, an offering, which he gave to the Kohen, and that was approximately 2% of the crop. Thereafter, he would take off 10% of the remaining, let's say 98%, so 9.8% of his crop, he would separate and give it to the Levy, the tribe of Levy. From the remainder, which is approximately 89%, he would take 10% of that, and that was called Meiser Sheni, the second tithe. Now, this was not a gift given to anyone. It was an expense account to be enjoyed by the farmer and his family when he would go several times a year on a pilgrimage to Yerushalayim for Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Sholosh Regolim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. He would spend some time in Yerushalayim. He wasn't working, he wasn't earning. Where would he get the money for that enjoyment during that time? So there's an enjoyment allowance, kind of a mandatory, let's call it vacation tax, although of course it was much more than a vacation. It was an opportunity to imbibe the atmosphere of Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash, an atmosphere of holiness and Kedusha and Simcha, while he was there on pilgrimage. But at any rate, it was an expense account for the enjoyment of the farmer and his family while they were in Yerushalayim. So he wouldn't pay his electricity bills, but he would pay for food and drink and other enjoyment items that he used during his stay in Yerushalayim. So this was the rule for year one of the Shemitah cycle. Again, first Truma, then Meiser Rishon, Truma 2% approximately, Meiser Rishon 10% of the remainder given to Leviim, 10% of the remainder after that set aside as Meiser Sheni, which could be used only in Yerushalayim. That was the order of the first year of the Shemitah cycle and the second year of the Shemitah cycle. But the third year of the Shemitah cycle was different. The 10% of the remainder after taking off Truma and Meiser, the next 10% were Meiser Oni. It was a tzedakah for the poor. It was set aside for the poor who didn't have their own. So the farmer set aside a portion of his crop for the poor. Now, the deadline, kind of the last day for filing taxes, for all 3 years of this cycle, which was half of the Shemitah 7-year cycle. 7th year was completely different because no planting was done, no harvesting was done, and therefore there's no truma and there's no meiser taken from the crop because the farmers didn't harvest the crop. But in the other 6 years of the Shemitah cycle, there was a division of 3 years plus 3 years. Years 1 and 2 were as described, Truma, Meiser, Meiser Sheni. That's years 1 and 2 and 4 and 5. Years 3 and 6, Meiser Oni, the tithe for the poor. And that's the basis for the practice of setting aside of 10% of one's income as a stocker for the poor. But the original mitzvah was setting aside 10% of the remainder of the crop. After taking Truma and Meiser on years 3 and 6, he would set aside 10% of the remainder of the produce for the poor. Now the deadline was on Pesach, the day before Pesach, year 3 and year 6. By that time, you had to clear out of the house any maestris, any tithes which had collected from the previous 2 years. You had set it aside, but you had not yet necessarily distributed it to the Kohen, to the Levy, or to the poor. So by Pesach of years 3 and 6, you had to clear out all the accumulated meiser and distribute it appropriately. On doing so, you would make that declaration that you had separated the meisers properly, you had distributed them properly, you had not done whatever Torah said you're not allowed to do with them. I won't go into the details. That declaration was made at a Pesach of years 3 and 6, and that is the content of the second section of the parasha. Following that, the farmer continued. Look down, Hashem, from your holy abode from heaven. Bless your people, Yisrael, and the land which you have given them, as you swore to our forefathers that you would give, a land flowing with milk and honey. By the way, the honey in this case is not bees' honey, but it is the honey from dates, date honey. And that's got to do with the land, of course. Okay, that's the end of the second section. Third section begins with a pasuk with which we are going to discuss today, and we'll go into two more pasukim. The pasuk which we're going to learn today is chapter 26, pasuk 16, 26, 16. Hayoim hazeh, this day, Hashem lekechem Tavo, Hashem your God commands you, la soiset hachukim o elevet hamishpotim, to do these laws and these statutes and these laws. V'shomarto, you will guard, v'osisto oistom, you will practice them, v'chol lavo v'chol, v'chol nafshecha, with all your heart and with all your soul. Then the pasuk continues, as Hashem emarto ayoim, you have designated Hashem as unique to be your God, to follow in his ways, to guard his laws and his statutes and his mitzvahs and his laws, to listen to his voice. Next pasuk, and Hashem has designated you as unique, to be a chosen nation for him, as he spoke to you, as he spoke about you, and to keep all his mitzvahs. Okay, that's the flow of the parsha. Now, what does it mean that Hashem commanded you today to do these statutes and laws, and you will guard them and practice them with all your heart and soul? What does the pasuk state? So, many meforshim understand this as an exhortation. You shall practice all these statutes and laws, and you shall regard them as new. Don't become jaded. Don't become been there, done that. No, it should always be like it was given today, as Rashi said. But the rest of the pasuk, and you will guard them and keep them with all your heart and soul, is seen by many meforshim as an exhortation. But Rashi learns differently. Rashi comments on the three words, V'shomarto v'osisto oistom, you will guard and you will practice them. Says Rashi, Baskol, a heavenly voice, Mevorchosoi, blesses the farmer and says, Hey, bikurim hayoim, you have brought bikurim today, tishne leshono habo'o, you will repeat it next year. So it's a blessing. Next year you'll have a good harvest. You'll also bring choice fruits of the fruits, and you'll give thanks to Hashem. So it's a blessing because you practiced bikurim properly this year. You'll be able to repeat it the following year. Now, the Rebbe first explains, why would Rashi want to understand it as a blessing rather than as an instruction, as an exhortation? So the Meforshim on Rashi explain that since this pasuk comes in sequence after one had already finished doing the mitzvah of bikurim and the declaration about ma'aseres, and after the description of the way the mitzvah was done, so what is now? You shall guard them and do them. The rest of the flow of the psukim after this postic are all about the praise of Yidden. Hashem has designated you as a special nation. You, in return, have designated Hashem as your God, the other way around. So it's all about the praise of Yidden. So where does this exhortation fit in? It doesn't belong to before, and it doesn't belong to after. That's why Rashi learned that indeed it is not an instruction, a commandment. We're finished with the fulfillment of those commandments spoken about earlier. It is a blessing that because they fulfilled, the farmer has fulfilled the mitzvah of Bikurim, the Pasuk says he has a reward and a blessing. And the blessing actually belongs with the psukim afterwards, which talk about the praise and blessing of the Eden. So this blessing is that you will be able to repeat it next year. And in passing, the Rebbe also explained the usage of the verb, you will repeat it next year, but I won't go into that now. But the Rebbe is not satisfied. What? Granted that Rashi understands the Pasuk as a blessing for having fulfilled the mitzvah spoken of earlier. But why did Rashi jump back to Bikurim? Again, the sequence of the parasha, first the mitzvah of Bikurim, first fruit, then the mitzvah of Meiser and the declaration that a person had disbursed the Meiser properly, and then this Pasuk. So if Rashi sees that as a bracha related to the mitzvah from before, why did he jump over the immediately previous mitzvah of Meiser and go back to the first mitzvah in the parasha, namely Bikurim? And you can't say, said the Rebbe, that actually Rashi means that for having done all the mitzvahs mentioned previously, both Bikurim and the declaration of Meiser, because concerning the declaration of Meiser, you can't say, may you repeat it next year, because the next time that the person will make this declaration is 3 years hence, if it's now the 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle, or 4 years hence, if it's the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. So you will repeat it next year, makes no sense. So Rashi means specifically that this is the bracha for Bikurim. So where did Rashi get the idea of jumping back to Bikurim instead of the declaration of Meiser? Moreover, on top of everything else, said the Rebbe, the klotz kasha, the elephant in the room question, which nobody bothers to address, how does the heavenly voice come in here? We know there are many sukkim where the Torah said that a Yid will be rewarded for doing the mitzvahs, but nowhere do we find this idea that a heavenly voice announces his reward. Why suddenly here? And how is that pshat, pshuto shel mikro, the simple meaning of the post? So, Rabbi explains. The declaration of Meiser is only done if a person had delayed his Meiser disbursement until the final deadline Erev Pesach of the 3rd and 6th year. So if you bless him for that and say that you'll be able to repeat it next time, never mind next year, but next time, is tantamount to blessing him that next time you also won't disburse it in time, and you'll just manage to sneak in a day before the deadline. And that's when you'll make the declaration. What kind of blessing is that? That you won't do the mitzvah properly, you do it in a way which is that the Eved Shebed the Eved, the least effective way of doing it. Therefore, Rashi must learn that the brocha relates in fact to Bikurim. And the Tishna, may you repeat, the blessing, may you repeat, is in fact next year when you bring Bikurim again. And he brought the Bikurim properly, so the blessing is that you'll guard the mitzvah Bikurim next year with all your heart, with all your soul, happily, joyfully. But how can you say that the brocha, we understand why Rashi said that it relates to Bikurim, but how can it relate to Bikurim when in between the mitzvah of Bikurim and this posuk, there's a whole section relating to Meiser and the declaration about Meiser. So we must say that there's something in the mitzvah of the declaration of Meiser, something that has to do with Bikurim as well. What is that? That is the very last phrase of the posuk that concludes the mitzvah of Bidui Meiser, the declaration of Meiser. What is that posuk? As I quoted before, the farmer says on conclusion of the mitzvah of Bidui Meiser, the declaration, he says, "Look down, Hashem, from your holy abode in heaven and bless your people, Yisrael, and the land which you have given us, a land dripping with milk and honey." Honey has nothing to do with Meiser. Since the brocha is measure for measure, the brocha comes in direct correlation to the mitzvah which the person did that earned him the brocha. So where in the mitzvah of Meiser is there any honey? Milk, okay, it could be that the milk refers to the dripping of a very full, rich stalk of wheat. Chelek, chito, like the cream of the wheat, which when it's a very good crop, there's oozing from the crop. Okay, since Meiser is brought from the crop, we could relate it to that. But the honey, one doesn't bring Meiser from dates. In Pshuta Shel Mikra, in the simple understanding of the posuk, Meiser was brought from grain, wine, and oil, but not from dates. Bikurim were brought from dates. And that relates to the Zovas Cholov Udevash, the honey which dripped from the dates when they were rich and full and juicy. So there you have a connection to the mitzvah of Bikurim. So it's true that the whole section refers to the mitzvah of Bidui Meiser, but the But when it says here that this very day you shall regard the mitzvah of Bikurim as though it were given today, why is that relevant? Why is that important every day? Now we understand, said the Rebbe, because we're talking about the mitzvah of Bikurim which express the etzem hanefesh, the core by its soul. And that core, the dedication that comes about as a result of that core, must be related to the everyday mitzvahs throughout the year. Therefore, we say that the mitzvah of Bikurim must be remembered daily. In other words, this idea that we should not be ingrates, but we should be grateful for that which Hashem gave us, must relate, that idea of Bikurim. It must relate to every single day that we live. In fact, that's why we start each day with the Moida Ani. I thankfully acknowledge you, Hashem, who has restored my soul after sleeping. He's restored my soul to me faithfully. I don't take it for granted that the everyday refreshing of that kind of gratitude expressed in the mitzvah Bikurim, and that's why it's important that we daily see the mitzvah Bikurim as having been given on that day.